"Marry me tonight or face the storm alone," the Navajo rancher said to the bleeding bride who'd stumbled into his camp, her wedding dress torn and her eyes wild with fear. As thunder rolled across the Arizona territory and 3 armed riders closed in on their trail. Arizona Territory, September 1885. The desert stretched endlessly under a blood-red sunset, sagebrush and mesquite dotting the harsh landscape like scattered prayers to an unforgiving sky. The September heat still shimmered off the red rocks, but darkness was coming fast, and with it, the kind of cold that could kill the unprepared. Through this wilderness, a lone figure in white stumbled across the rocky terrain. Her once pristine wedding gown, now torn and stained with dust and blood. Emma Charlotte Reed had been running for 2 days straight. Her delicate Boston boots never meant for such punishment, her corset making every breath a struggle in the thin desert air. Behind her, somewhere in the growing darkness, came the sound she'd been dreading, the rhythmic thunder of horses' hooves on hard-packed earth, getting closer with each passing hour. Her husband-to-be, Clayton Thornfield, wasn't the kind of man who accepted being left at the altar, especially not in front of half of Boston's high society. Emma's legs finally gave out near a cluster of red rocks, and she collapsed behind a boulder, pressing her back against the sun-warmed stone. Her hands shook as she tried to gather the torn fabric of her wedding dress, the beautiful French lace, now a liability that caught on every thorn and stone. She closed her eyes and tried to remember how she'd gotten here, how the perfect Boston debutante had ended up bleeding in the Arizona desert. It had started 3 months ago when her father, Cornelius Reed, had announced her engagement to Clayton Thornfield, heir to the largest cattle empire in the Southwest. "It's a perfect match," her father had declared over breakfast in their Beacon Hill mansion. "The Thornfields need our railroad connections. We need their western holdings. You'll be the queen of a cattle empire, Emma." But Emma had met Clayton only twice before the engagement was announced, and both times had left her with a chill that had nothing to do with Boston weather. There was something in his pale blue eyes, something predatory in the way he looked at her, as if she were just another piece of property to be acquired. The breaking point had come 2 weeks before the wedding, when she'd overheard Clayton talking to his foreman about his previous wives. The first one was too spirited, he'd laughed, had to break her like a wild horse. The second one learned quicker, but she was weak, didn't last through the first winter. Emma had fled that very night, using her mother's jewelry to buy passage on the first train heading west. She'd planned to reach California, to disappear into the anonymity of San Francisco. But Clayton's men had caught up with her in Flagstaff. Now, hiding behind the red rocks as darkness fell, Emma could hear them getting closer. Their voices carried on the desert wind, harsh and determined. "She can't have gone far in that dress," one called. "Mr. Thornfield wants her back alive, but he didn't say in what condition." The sound of a twig snapping made Emma's blood freeze, but it came from the wrong direction, from ahead of her instead of behind. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe. Daniel Sosi moved through the desert like a ghost, his moccasined feet finding purchase on loose rock without making a sound. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned to survive in 2 worlds, neither of which had ever fully accepted him. His dark hair was longer than white men wore it, but shorter than traditional Navajo style, a compromise that marked him as caught between cultures. His clothes were a similar blend, a white man's shirt and pants, but with traditional silver and turquoise jewelry that spoke of his heritage. Daniel had been tracking the 3 riders for the better part of the day, not because he cared about their business, but because they'd been careless with their campfires and were heading toward his small ranch. Any trouble that came to his land became his problem, whether he wanted it or not. What he hadn't expected was to find a woman in a wedding dress bleeding behind the rocks, her green eyes wide with terror in the moonlight. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, 2 unlikely figures in the vast emptiness of the desert. "Please," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Don't let them find me." Daniel's sharp eyes took in the torn dress, the blood on her hands. The way she flinched when a coyote howled in the distance. "Who's hunting you?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying only the faintest trace of an accent. "My betrothed, Clayton Thornfield. He has men. They've been following me for days." Daniel's expression darkened. He knew the name Thornfield, knew the reputation of the cattle baron who'd been expanding his empire by buying out smaller ranches, often at prices that weren't really negotiations. "What did you do to anger Clayton Thornfield?" "I left him at the altar," Emma said simply, "in front of 300 guests." Despite the gravity of the situation, Daniel almost smiled. That would do it. He studied her for a moment longer. "You picked a hard place to run, Boston lady. This desert kills people who know what they're doing. I didn't have a choice. He would have killed me eventually." "Just slower." The sound of horses grew louder, and Daniel made a decision that would change both their lives. "Come with me now, quietly." Emma struggled to her feet, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Daniel steadied her with one strong hand, noting how light she was, how soft her hands were despite the cuts and bruises. She was clearly a woman who'd never known hardship, never worked with her hands, never gone hungry. He led her through the rocks with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd grown up in this country, taking paths that would leave minimal tracks. Confused pursuit. After 20 minutes of careful movement, they reached a small hidden canyon where Daniel had made camp. His horse, a sturdy paint mare, lifted her head at their approach but didn't whinny, well-trained and calm. A small fire burned low between carefully arranged rocks. Nearly invisible from above, basic supplies were arranged with military precision. Speaking of a man who'd learned order and discipline somewhere. "Sit," Daniel commanded quietly. Gesturing to a flat rock near the fire, Emma sank down gratefully, her legs finally giving out completely. Daniel handed her a canteen, small sips. "Your body isn't used to this heat." As Emma drank, Daniel studied her in the firelight. She was beautiful, he had to admit, with auburn hair that caught the flames and green eyes that spoke of intelligence and spirit. But beauty was common enough. What interested him was the steel he saw beneath the fear. The fact that she'd chosen to run rather than submit. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked. 2 days, maybe 3, I lost track." Daniel handed her a piece of jerky and some hardtack. "Eat slowly, too much too fast will make you sick." Emma took the food gratefully, trying not to think about how her finishing school instructors would react to seeing her eat dried meat with her fingers in the middle of the desert. "You don't talk like other cowboys I've met." "I'm not a cowboy," Daniel said simply. "I raise horses, some cattle. I was educated at the Indian school in Carlisle." Emma had heard of the Indian schools, places where native children were sent to kill the Indian. Save the man, as the government put it. She studied Daniel's face, seeing the cost of such an education in the careful way he held himself, as if ready for rejection from either world. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Daniel poked at the fire with a stick, considering his answer. "Maybe because I know what it's like to run from something that wants to break you. Maybe because Clayton Thornfield burned out my neighbor last spring when the man wouldn't sell." The sound of horses echoed off the canyon walls. Closer now, Daniel immediately doused the fire, plunging them into darkness. "They're getting close," he whispered. "We need to move." But Emma was at the end of her strength. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed again. "I can't, I'm sorry. I just can't run anymore." Daniel looked at her. Then at the canyon entrance, where the sound of pursuit was growing louder, he made a calculation based on years of survival, years of being caught between worlds, years of making impossible choices. "There's another way," he said quietly. "But you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" Daniel met her eyes across the darkness. "Thornfield's men won't touch a married woman, especially not one married to someone with legal standing. It's one thing to hunt down a runaway bride, another to assault a man's wife." Emma's breath caught as she understood what he was suggesting. I mean marry me tonight, right now, before they find us." Daniel's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "I can perform the ceremony according to Navajo tradition. It won't be legal in white man's courts. But it'll be real enough to make Thornfield's men back off." Emma stared at him. This stranger, who'd appeared out of the desert night like something from a fever dream. "You don't even know me." "I know you're brave enough to run, smart enough to get this far alive, strong enough to keep going when most people would have given up." Daniel paused. "And I know Clayton Thornfield will kill you if he catches you." The horses were closer now. Emma could hear voices calling her name, harsh and demanding. "What would you get out of it?" she asked. Daniel considered the question seriously. "Thornfield's been pressuring me to sell my land, been making it clear the pressure's going to get worse. A wife gives a man standing, makes him harder to push around. And maybe," he added quietly, "maybe I'm tired of being alone." Emma looked into his dark eyes, seeing honesty there, and desperation that matched her own. He was offering her protection, sanctuary, a chance to become someone other than Clayton Thornfield's runaway bride. In return, she'd give him the respectability that came with marriage, the social standing that his mixed heritage had denied him. "How do I know you won't be just another version of Clayton?" she asked. "You don't," Daniel said simply. "But you know what Clayton is, and you know what happens if his men find you tonight." The sound of horses entering the canyon made the decision for both of them. "Yes," Emma whispered. "I'll marry you." Daniel moved quickly, pulling traditional items from his saddlebags. Sage for blessing, turquoise for protection, a silver bracelet that had belonged to his grandmother. In Navajo tradition, marriage is about two people choosing to walk the same path, to face the world together. He lit a small bundle of sage, the sweet smoke rising in the darkness. "I, Daniel Sosi, choose you, Emma Reed, to be my wife, to share my path, to face whatever comes with courage and honor." Emma took the sage from his hands, her voice trembling but determined. "I, Emma Charlotte Reed, choose you, Daniel Sosi, to be my husband, to share your path, to face whatever comes with courage and honor." Daniel slipped the silver bracelet onto her wrist. "By the blessing of the four directions, by the strength of the earth and sky, we are married." "Married," Emma repeated, the words strange on her tongue. The ceremony had taken less than 5 minutes, but as Daniel helped Emma to her feet, both of them felt the weight of what they'd just done. They were no longer strangers hiding in the desert. They were husband and wife, bound together by desperation and hope in equal measure. The sound of hoofbeats filled the canyon as 3 riders appeared at the entrance, their torches casting dancing shadows on the red rock walls. Jake Morrison, Thornfield's foreman, rode in the lead, his scarred face set in grim determination. "Well, well," Morrison called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Emma Reed, mister. Thornfield's been worried sick about you." Daniel stepped protectively in front of Emma, his hand resting casually on the knife at his belt. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. This is my wife, Emma Tsozi." Morrison's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "Your wife? Indian? You're either lying or you just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Show them," Daniel said quietly to Emma. Emma held up her left hand, where the silver bracelet caught the torchlight. "I'm married to Daniel Tsosi. According to Navajo law and custom, I'm no longer Emma Reed." The 3 riders exchanged uncertain glances. They'd been hired to bring back a runaway bride, not to assault a married woman, especially not one married to a man who clearly knew how to handle himself. "Thornfield ain't going to like this," Morrison said finally. "Thornfield's opinion doesn't matter anymore," Daniel replied calmly. "My wife is under my protection now." Morrison spat in the dirt. "This ain't over, Indian. Thornfield don't give up easy." "Neither do I," Daniel said, his voice carrying a quiet threat that made all 3 riders take notice. After a long, tense moment, Morrison wheeled his horse around. "Come on, boys. Let's get back to town, mister. Thornfield's going to want to hear about this." As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, Daniel and Emma stood in the darkness, the magnitude of what they'd just done settling over them like the desert silence. They were married, protected for the moment, but both understood that their troubles were just beginning. Emma looked down at the silver bracelet on her wrist, then up at the man who was now her husband. What happens now? Daniel began gathering his supplies, his movements efficient and practiced. Now we go to my ranch. You learn to be a rancher's wife. I learned to be a husband, and we both pray that what we just started doesn't get us killed." As they prepared to leave the canyon, Emma realized that in the space of a few desperate minutes, she'd traded one uncertain future for another. But this time at least the choice had been hers. The ride to Daniel's ranch took them through terrain that seemed to shift with every mile, from red rock canyons to rolling grassland dotted with juniper and pinon pine. Emma rode behind Daniel on his paint mare, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, acutely aware of every place their bodies touched through the thin fabric of her torn wedding dress. Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains when they finally crested a low hill, and Emma saw her new home spread out below them. Daniel's ranch occupied a natural valley where a spring-fed creek meandered between cottonwood trees, creating a green oasis in the harsh desert landscape. The main house was modest but well built, constructed of adobe and timber with a wide front porch that faced the morning sun. A barn and several corrals stretched beyond the house, and Emma could see horses moving in the pastures, their coats gleaming in the early light. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," Daniel said as they approached the house, his voice carefully neutral. Emma studied the clean lines of the buildings, the careful placement that took advantage of natural windbreaks and water sources, the obvious pride in maintenance that spoke of a man who cared for what was his. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Daniel helped her down from the horse, and Emma's legs nearly buckled after hours in the saddle. Her body ached in places she'd never known could ache, and her wedding dress was now more dirt than white. "There's a room at the back of the house," Daniel said awkwardly. "It was meant to be a parlor, but it has its own entrance. You can have your privacy." The careful distance in his voice made Emma realize that despite their midnight ceremony, Daniel was still a stranger, and she was still a woman who'd fled one marriage only to stumble into another. "Thank you," she said formally. Daniel led the horse toward the barn while Emma stood uncertainly in the yard, taking in the foreign landscape of her new life. Everything was different here. The sounds, the smells, even the quality of light seemed alien to someone raised in Boston's gentle climate. The back room Daniel had mentioned was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed covered in a quilt of deep blues and earth tones. A washstand held a pitcher and basin, and a single window looked out toward the creek. Emma sank onto the bed, and for the first time in days, allowed herself to truly rest. She woke to the sound of voices outside, men speaking in a mixture of English and what she assumed was Navajo. Peering through the window, she saw Daniel talking with two native men near the corrals. The conversation animated as they examined a young stallion. One of the men was older, perhaps 60, with grey streaking his long black hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent squinting into desert sun. The other was younger, closer to Daniel's age, with a quick smile and hands that moved expressively as he talked. Emma realized she was eavesdropping on her husband's life, getting her first glimpse of the world she'd married into. The easy familiarity between the men spoke of long friendship, shared work, a community she knew nothing about. A knock on her door interrupted her observation. Daniel's voice came through the wood, careful and respectful. "Mrs. Tzosi, I brought you some clothes that might fit better than, well, what you're wearing." Emma opened the door to find Daniel holding a bundle of women's clothing, his eyes carefully averted from her disheveled appearance. "These belonged to my neighbor's daughter before she married and moved to Santa Fe. Maria thought you might need them." The clothes were simple but well made, a brown riding skirt, white cotton blouse, and sturdy boots that looked like they'd actually protect her feet. "Thank you," Emma said. "Daniel, who are those men you're talking with?" "Tom Begay and his son Marcus. They help me with the horses. Breed some of the finest stock in the territory." Daniel paused. "Tom taught me everything I know about reading horse bloodlines." Emma nodded, filing away another piece of information about the man she'd married. "Will they be staying for dinner?" Daniel looked surprised. "You don't have to cook, Emma. You've been through enough. I need to do something useful," Emma said firmly. And if we're going to convince people this marriage is real, I should probably learn how to be a ranch wife. The kitchen was better equipped than Emma had expected, with a large wood-burning stove, ample counter space, and shelves lined with preserved foods. Emma had never cooked a meal in her life, relying on the army of servants in her father's house. But desperation made for a quick teacher. She found eggs in the chicken coop, fresh bread wrapped in cloth, bacon hanging in the smokehouse. By the time Daniel and his friends came in for the midday meal, she'd managed to produce something that resembled breakfast if you didn't look too closely. Tom Begay studied Emma with the frank curiosity of someone meeting his friend's wife for the first time. "You're far from home, daughter," he said kindly. "Yes, sir, very far," Emma replied. Serving coffee that was only slightly burnt, Marcus grinned at his father. "Papa, you're making her nervous with all your staring." "I'm not staring, I'm observing," Tom said with dignity. "Daniel's been alone too long. A man needs a woman to make a house into a home." Daniel shot his friend a warning look, but Tom continued, "Of course, marriage is about more than just convenience. It takes time to build understanding between two people from different worlds." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, understanding the older man's subtle message. He knew this was an arrangement born of necessity, not love, and he was kindly offering wisdom about making it work. "Tom's been married to the same woman for 40 years, Daniel explained. "He considers himself an expert on the subject." 42 years, Tom corrected. "And yes, I am an expert. The secret is respect, daughter. Respect and patience and the willingness to learn each other's ways. After the men returned to work, Emma explored the ranch. Getting her bearings in this new world, the horses were magnificent, clearly bred for both beauty and endurance. She watched Daniel work with a spirited mare, his movements calm and sure as he gentled the animal. "She's been skittish since we brought her in from the wild," Daniel explained when he noticed Emma watching. "Takes time to build trust." Emma wondered if he was talking about the horse or about their situation. "How long have you been ranching here?" 5 years. I bought the land with money I saved from my time as an army scout." Daniel's voice carried a note of pride. "First native man in the territory to own land under the Homestead Act." Emma heard the significance in that statement, the barriers he'd had to overcome, the prejudice he'd faced. It must have been difficult. "Everything worth having is difficult," Daniel said simply. That evening, Emma attempted to cook dinner with slightly better results. Daniel ate without complaint, but she noticed him adding extra salt to everything. "I've never had to cook before," she admitted. "In Boston, we had servants for everything." "You'll learn," Daniel said. "Maria Begay is an excellent cook. She might be willing to teach you if you asked." Emma nodded, making a mental note to swallow her pride and ask for help. "Daniel, what happens when Clayton comes?" "Because he will come." Daniel set down his fork, his expression serious. "Thornfield has money and influence, but this is Navajo land. He can't just ride in here and take what he wants." "You don't know Clayton. He doesn't accept defeat." "Neither do I," Daniel said quietly. "But we need to make this marriage look real, Emma. If anyone suspects it's just a convenience, Thornfield will use it against us." Emma understood what he wasn't saying. They needed to convince the community, both white and native, that their marriage was genuine. That meant learning to live together, to present themselves as a real couple. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Daniel considered the question. "Learn the ranch, learn my friends, learn enough about horses to talk intelligently when people ask. And Emma, learn about Navajo customs. If you're going to be my wife, you need to understand my culture." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead of her. She was going to have to become someone entirely new, shed her Boston identity like an old dress and become Emma Sozy, rancher's wife. "There's something else," Daniel said, his voice careful. "Tom mentioned that his wife wants to meet you. Maria's opinion carries weight in the community. If she accepts you, others will follow." Emma felt a flutter of nervousness. What if she doesn't? "No, then we'll have problems," Daniel said honestly. "Maria Begay is respected by both Navajo and white families. Her approval would go a long way toward establishing your place here. That night, Emma lay in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Coyotes calling in the distance, the wind moving through the cottonwoods, the creak of the house settling through the thin walls. She could hear Daniel moving around in the main part of the house, probably checking doors and windows, making sure they were secure. She thought about the silver bracelet on her wrist, heavier than any jewelry she'd ever worn, a symbol of vows made in desperation but binding nonetheless. In 24 hours, she'd gone from being Emma Reed, runaway bride, to Emma Tsosi, rancher's wife. The transformation felt surreal. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Emma?" Daniel's voice was quiet, respectful. "Are you awake?" She opened the door to find him holding a rifle, his expression alert. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing, but I heard riders earlier. They stopped about a mile out and haven't moved since." Daniel's eyes were serious. "Could be travelers making camp, could be Thornfield's men watching the ranch." Emma felt fear spike through her. "What do we do?" "We prepare and we stick to our story. If anyone asks, we've been married for weeks. You came out from Boston to marry me. It was all arranged through letters." Emma nodded, understanding the importance of a consistent story. "Daniel, if this brings trouble to your friends, to your community—" "Emma," Daniel interrupted gently, "you're my wife now, my responsibility. My choice, whatever comes, we face it together." The simple declaration carried more weight than any romantic poetry Emma had ever read. It was a promise of partnership, of standing together against whatever threatened them. She realized that in his quiet way, Daniel was offering her something Clayton never had. Respect and protection freely given, not demanded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Daniel nodded once, then handed her a smaller pistol. "Do you know how to use this?" Emma shook her head, and Daniel spent the next hour teaching her the basics. How to load, aim, and fire, how to keep the weapon clean and ready. "Hopefully you'll never need it," he said. "But a rancher's wife should know how to protect herself." As dawn approached with no sign of the mysterious riders, Emma began to understand that this was her life now. This constant awareness of potential danger, this need to be prepared for trouble. It was as far from her sheltered Boston existence as the moon from the earth. Daniel made breakfast while Emma practiced loading the pistol, their movements around each other already developing a careful rhythm. They were still strangers in many ways, but they were learning to be married strangers, which was perhaps the first step towards something more. "Today, I'll take you to meet the Bigays," Daniel said as they ate. "Tom's wife Maria will want to hear our story. She'll test you, Emma, kindly but thoroughly." Emma straightened her shoulders, preparing for another challenge. What should I expect? Questions about your family, your intentions, your willingness to learn Navajo ways." Daniel paused. "And she'll want to see if you have the strength for this life. Maria's buried 3 children and 2 husbands. She doesn't suffer weakness gladly." Emma nodded, understanding that this meeting would determine whether she'd be accepted or forever seen as an outsider. "I won't disappoint you," she said. Daniel looked at her across the breakfast table. This proper Boston lady who'd already shown more courage than most men he knew. "Emma, you've already proven you're stronger than you look. Just be yourself." As they prepared for the day ahead, both of them understood that they were moving deeper into their assumed roles, becoming the married couple they needed to be for survival. Whether that performance would eventually become reality remained to be seen. The Bigay homestead sprawled across a fertile valley 15 miles from Daniel's ranch, where generations of careful cultivation had transformed the desert into productive farmland. As they approached in Daniel's wagon, Emma could see fields of corn and squash stretching toward distant mesas, their green abundance speaking of deep knowledge about coaxing life from reluctant soil. Maria Bigay emerged from the adobe house before they'd even stopped the wagon, her presence commanding despite her small stature. At 58, she moved with the efficient grace of a woman who'd spent decades managing a household, raising children and supporting her community through drought and plenty alike. Her dark eyes missed nothing as they swept over Emma's borrowed clothes, her carefully braided hair, the way she held herself with unconscious aristocratic bearing despite her attempts to appear humble. "So," Maria said in accented English, "this is the woman who stole our Daniel's heart." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks at the gentle teasing, but she met Maria's gaze steadily. "Mrs. Begay, I'm honored to meet you. Daniel speaks of your family with great respect." Maria's expression remained neutral, but Emma caught a flicker of approval at the formal courtesy. "Come inside, daughter. We have much to discuss while the men tend to their horse business." The interior of the Begay home was a revelation. Comfortable furniture mixed with traditional Navajo textiles, modern conveniences alongside artifacts that spoke of deep cultural roots. Emma found herself studying everything, trying to understand this blending of worlds that seemed so natural here. Maria served tea in delicate china cups that seemed incongruous with the rustic setting. "Tell me about your family, Emma. What brings a Boston lady to marry a Navajo rancher in the middle of nowhere?" Emma had rehearsed this story with Daniel during the wagon ride, but under Maria's penetrating stare, the practiced words felt hollow. "My father arranged a marriage that would have been difficult. I wrote to Daniel through a friend who knew him from his time at Carlisle. We corresponded for months before I came west to marry him." "Months of correspondence," Maria repeated thoughtfully. "And yet you look at my son-in-law like you're still learning his face." Emma's breath caught son-in-law. The casual designation spoke of bonds deeper than mere friendship. Daniel was family to these people, which made her scrutiny all the more important. "Letters can only reveal so much," Emma said carefully. "Being married to someone is different from writing to them." Maria nodded slowly. "True words, tell me. What did Daniel write about in these letters that convinced you to travel so far from everything familiar?" Emma thought about Daniel's quiet strength, his careful honor, the way he'd protected her without asking for anything in return. He wrote about building something lasting, about the beauty of this land, about wanting a partner to share the work and the rewards. She paused. "And he wrote about loneliness, Mrs. Begay, the kind that eats at a person's soul." For the first time, Maria's expression softened. "You understand loneliness, daughter?" Yes," Emma said simply. "I understand being alone in a room full of people. I understand having your life planned by others with no regard for your own desires. I understand the feeling that you're slowly disappearing." Maria studied Emma's face, seeing something there that satisfied her. Good. A woman who has never been hungry cannot appreciate bread. A woman who has never been lonely cannot value companionship. She rose and moved to a large wooden chest, withdrawing a bundle wrapped in soft doeskin. "This belonged to my mother. And her mother before that." Maria unwrapped a necklace of silver and turquoise, each stone perfectly matched, the metalwork intricate beyond anything Emma had ever seen. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed. "It is a marriage necklace, worn by the women of our family for 6 generations. Maria held it up to the light, where the turquoise seemed to glow with inner fire. "When a woman marries into our family, she receives this as a symbol of acceptance, of belonging." Emma's heart raced, understanding the significance of what was being offered. "Mrs. Begay, I can't accept something so precious. What if I'm not worthy of it?" Maria's laugh was rich and warm. "Daughter, worthiness is not something you are born with. It is something you earn, through your choices, through your actions, through the way you treat the people who depend on you." She moved behind Emma and fastened the necklace around her throat, the silver cool against her skin. "There, now you look like a proper Navajo wife." Maria stepped back to admire the effect. "But looking the part is only the beginning. Can you cook traditional foods? Can you weave? Can you help deliver a foal or tend a sick animal?" Emma's shoulders sagged. "No, Mrs. Begay, I can't do any of those things. In Boston, I was taught to paint watercolors and speak French and plan dinner parties. None of that seems very useful here." Then you will learn, Maria said matter-of-factly. Learning shows respect. Respect builds trust. Trust creates family. Over the next several hours, Maria began Emma's education in earnest, teaching her to identify different types of corn, showing her how to grind meal on a traditional metate, explaining the properties of various desert plants that could be used for food or medicine. Emma's hands, soft from a lifetime of leisure, quickly developed blisters from the rough stone of the grinding tool. But she persisted, understanding that this was more than cooking instruction. It was an initiation, a test of her commitment to this new life. Pain is a teacher, Maria observed as Emma flexed her aching fingers. It shows us what we truly want. If you want this life badly enough, you will endure the pain of learning it. Outside, they could hear the men working with horses, Daniel's voice mixing with Tom's in a conversation about bloodlines and breeding strategies. The easy familiarity between them spoke of years of partnership, of shared goals and mutual respect. Daniel is like another son to me, Maria said, following Emma's gaze toward the window. When he came back from Carlisle, he was lost between worlds, too educated for traditional life but never fully accepted in white society. Tom and I helped him find his way, gave him work, taught him to be proud of what he was instead of ashamed of what he wasn't. Emma heard the warning beneath the story. You're telling me that I could hurt him. I'm telling you that he's been hurt enough, Maria said gently but firmly. Daniel chose to trust you, to bring you into our family, to share his life with you. That trust is precious, daughter. Don't waste it on lies or half-truths. The older woman's penetrating stare seemed to see straight through Emma's carefully constructed story. Mrs. Begay, Emma began hesitantly, what if someone's past makes them unsuitable for the life they want? What if they've made mistakes? Maria set down her teacup and studied Emma's face. Everyone has a past, daughter. The question is whether you learn from it or let it define you. A woman who runs towards something shows courage. A woman who only runs away shows fear. What's the difference? The woman running towards something has hope, has a vision of what her life could become. A woman running away is just trying to escape. She has no plan beyond avoiding pain. Emma considered this wisdom, recognizing the truth in it. I think I was running away at first, she admitted. But now, being here, learning this life, I think I might be running towards something after all. Maria smiled, the first genuine warmth Emma had seen from her. Good answer, daughter. Hope is the beginning of all good things. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors. Through the window, Emma saw 3 riders approaching the house, and her blood froze as she recognized the lead rider, Sheriff Augustus Whitmore, a thin, pale man with cold eyes and an official badge that gave weight to his prejudices. Maria, Sheriff Whitmore called as he dismounted. I need to speak with you about your Indian friend and his new wife. Emma's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. This was what she'd been dreading. The moment when Clayton's influence reached into her new life. Maria noticed her distress and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Remember, daughter, you belong here now. You are family. We protect our own. Daniel and Tom emerged from the barn, their postures alert as they recognized potential trouble. Sheriff Whitmore's visits were never social calls, and his presence here meant someone with power had sent him. Sheriff, Daniel said evenly, what brings you out this way? Got a complaint from Clayton Thornfield about a missing bride. Whitmore's voice carried the authority of his badge. Says some Indian kidnapped his intended wife, forced her into an illegal marriage. Emma stepped onto the porch, wearing Maria's necklace like armor. Sheriff Whitmore, I'm Emma Tsosi. I believe you're looking for me. Whitmore's cold eyes swept over her, taking in the traditional jewelry, the borrowed clothes. The way she stood close to Daniel. Mrs. Reed, you need to come with me, mister. Thornfield is very concerned about your welfare. It's Mrs. Tsosi now, Emma said firmly, and I'm exactly where I choose to be. Choice? Whitmore's laugh was harsh. Ma'am, no proper white woman chooses to live with savages. You've obviously been coerced. Intimidated, maybe worse. Daniel stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Sheriff, you're on Tom Begay's land now. Speaking to his family, I suggest you choose your words more carefully." "Don't threaten me, Indian," Whitmore snarled. "I've got legal authority here." "And I've got moral authority," Tom Begay said quietly, emerging from behind the sheriff with several of his sons. "This is Navajo land, Sheriff. You're here as our guest. Act like it." Emma realized that the family had quietly surrounded the sheriff and his men, not threatening but making it clear that they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The solidarity was breathtaking. These people who barely knew her were willing to stand against legal authority to protect her. "Mrs. Tsozi," Sheriff Whitmore said, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone as he recognized his disadvantage. "I just need to hear from your own lips that you're here voluntarily, that no one has forced you into anything against your will." Emma straightened, drawing on every lesson in poise and presentation she'd learned in Boston finishing school. "Sheriff, I came to Arizona Territory of my own free will to marry Daniel Tsozi. We were wed according to Navajo custom, with witnesses. I am his wife by choice and by law. Navajo custom isn't recognized by territorial law," Whitmore said, grasping for legal ground. "Actually, it is," Maria said quietly, producing a document from her apron pocket. "Territorial Statute 247 recognizes indigenous marriage customs as legally binding when both parties consent and witnesses are present." Emma stared at the older woman in amazement. Maria had been prepared for this confrontation, had armed herself with legal knowledge to protect her new daughter-in-law. The depth of that preparation spoke of bonds deeper than Emma had understood. Sheriff Whitmore examined the document, his face growing redder as he realized his legal position was weaker than he'd thought. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Thornfield has influence, connections. He won't just accept this. Then Thornfield can file a legal challenge," Daniel said calmly. "Until then, my wife and I have work to do." As the sheriff and his men rode away, Emma felt the weight of what had just happened. An entire community had stood up to legal authority to protect her, had claimed her as family, had risked their own safety for a woman they barely knew. "Thank you," she whispered to Maria. "All of you, thank you." Maria smiled and adjusted the turquoise necklace around Emma's throat. "Family protects family, daughter, that's what we do." That evening, as they rode back to Daniel's ranch, Emma was quiet, processing the day's events. She wore Maria's necklace and carried new knowledge about corn grinding, plant medicine, and the fierce loyalty of people who chose to trust her. "You did well today," Daniel said as they reached the ranch. "Maria doesn't give her approval easily." Emma touched the necklace at her throat. "She gave me more than approval, Daniel. She gave me a place to belong." Daniel helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Emma, there's something you should know. What happened today, the way everyone stood with us, that changes things." "How?" "It means we're really married now, not just in ceremony, but in the eyes of the community. There's no going back from this." Emma looked up at him in the gathering twilight. This man who'd become her husband, her protector, her partner in a life she was still learning to live. "Good," she said quietly. "I don't want to go back." For the first time since their desperate wedding night, Daniel smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Then welcome home, Mrs. Tsozi." As they walked toward the house together, Emma realized that somewhere between morning and evening, between Maria's kitchen and Sheriff Whitmore's threats, she had stopped running away and started running toward something, toward a life she was only beginning to imagine but was already prepared to fight for. 3 weeks after Sheriff Whitmore's visit, Emma had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Her hands had toughened from ranch work, her skin had bronzed under the desert sun, and she could now grind cornmeal without wincing at every stroke. Daniel worked alongside her with quiet patience, teaching her to read weather patterns in cloud formations and animal behavior. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Miguel Santos, their nearest neighbor, rode up to the ranch with his hat in his hands and worry etched deep in his weathered face. Miguel owned a small spread 5 miles south, where he raised cattle and sheep with his wife and 3 children. Daniel, amigo, I need your help. Miguel's voice carried the weight of desperation. Last night, men came to my ranch, said I had 2 weeks to sell to Thornfield or they'd burn me out. Emma felt ice form in her stomach. Clayton's reach was extending, pressing closer to their sanctuary. Daniel's expression darkened as he listened to Miguel's account of the midnight visit. How many men? Daniel asked. 6, maybe 7, led by that scarred one, Morrison. They weren't making empty threats, Daniel. They showed me what was left of the Patterson place. Emma knew the Patterson homestead, or what remained of it. She and Daniel had ridden past the blackened ruins the week before. Daniel had explained that the family had refused to sell to Thornfield and had paid the price. Now the same fate threatened Miguel's family. What did you tell them? Daniel asked quietly. That I needed time to consider their offer. Miguel's voice cracked with shame. Daniel, I have 3 little ones. My wife is with child again. I can't risk their lives for pride. Emma watched Daniel struggle with the impossible position Miguel faced. Stand and fight and risk your family, or surrender and lose everything you'd worked to build. It was the same choice Daniel would face if Clayton decided to escalate his pressure. You're welcome to bring your family here, Daniel offered. We can make room, wait this out together. Miguel shook his head. That just makes you a target too, amigo. Thornfield wants my land to complete his eastern boundary. He'll keep pushing until he gets it. After Miguel left, Emma found Daniel in the barn, methodically cleaning his rifle with the careful attention of a man preparing for war. This is because of me, she said quietly. Clayton's using Miguel to get to us. Daniel looked up from his weapon. This started long before you arrived, Emma. Thornfield's been buying up small ranches for 2 years, forcing out anyone who won't sell. You just gave him another reason to move faster. What are we going to do? Oh, we're going to help Miguel defend his land, Daniel said matter-of-factly. And if Thornfield wants a fight, we'll give him one. Emma felt fear and pride war in her chest, fear for Daniel's safety, pride in his unwillingness to abandon a friend. Daniel, Clayton has money, hired guns, political connections. We can't fight him directly. Maybe not, Daniel agreed. But we can make the cost higher than he's willing to pay. That evening, Tom Bigay arrived with his sons, Marcus and Joseph, along with Sam Yazzie, a cousin who'd served as a cavalry scout with Daniel years before. The men gathered around Daniel's kitchen table, planning strategy with the quiet efficiency of veterans. Miguel's place is too exposed, Tom observed, studying a hand-drawn map. Open approaches from 3 directions, no natural cover. Which is why they chose to pressure him first, Sam added. Take the weakest position, use it to threaten the stronger ones. Emma served coffee and listened to the tactical discussion, understanding that these men were preparing for something more serious than a mere confrontation. They were planning a war, albeit a small one. What about the law? She asked. Can't we get help from territorial authorities? The men exchanged glances, and Marcus spoke up. Mrs. Tsozi, begging your pardon, but the law tends to side with whoever has the most money. Thornfield's got Sheriff Whitmore in his pocket, and probably the territorial governor too. So we're on our own, Emma said, accepting the reality of their situation. We've always been on our own, Daniel said quietly. The question is whether we fight or run. Emma thought about Maria's necklace around her throat, about the community that had accepted her, about the life she was building brick by brick in this harsh but beautiful land. We fight, she said firmly. The attack came 2 nights later, not at Miguel's ranch as expected, but at the Begay homestead. Emma woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of Daniel's boots hitting the floor as he lunged for his rifle. Fire, he said tersely, already pulling on his clothes. Big one. Coming from the direction of Tom's place. They rode hard through the darkness, Emma clinging to Daniel's waist as his horse stretched into a full gallop. Behind them came the thunder of other horses as neighbors responded to the orange glow on the horizon. The sight that greeted them at the Begay ranch was devastating. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like hungry fingers. Tom and his sons were fighting desperately to save the house, passing buckets of water in a chain that seemed pitifully inadequate against the inferno. Daniel immediately joined the bucket brigade, while Emma rushed to help Maria evacuate precious possessions from the house. The older woman's face was streaked with soot and tears, but her movements remained purposeful, determined. "The horses!" Maria gasped as Emma helped her carry a chest of family photographs. "They got most of the horses out, but there are 3 still trapped in the back stalls." Emma could hear the animals' terrified screaming over the roar of flames. A sound that cut through her heart like a blade. Without thinking, she grabbed a wet blanket and ran toward the barn. "Emma, no!" Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. But she was already pushing through the smoke-filled doorway. Inside, the barn was hell on earth. Flames consumed the hayloft above, while smoke filled the air so thick Emma could barely see her own hands. The trapped horses were in the far stalls, their eyes rolling white with terror as they fought against their halters. Emma fought her way through the heat and smoke, her lungs burning with every breath. The first horse, a young mare, calmed slightly at her approach, allowing Emma to lead her toward the door outside. Willing hands took the animal to safety. 2 more trips into that blazing hell. 2 more horses saved on the final rescue. A burning beam crashed down just behind Emma. Missing her by inches, Daniel caught her as she stumbled out, his face white with fear and fury. "Don't ever do anything that stupid again," he said fiercely, holding her against his chest as if he could absorb the smoke and burns that marked her courage. "The horses!" Emma gasped. "I couldn't let them burn." "You could have died." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion she'd never heard from him before. By dawn, the barn was nothing but charred timbers and ash. But the house had been saved, and more importantly, no lives had been lost. The community gathered in the yard, sharing coffee and planning the rebuilding effort with the quiet determination of people accustomed to hardship. Sheriff Whitmore arrived as the sun was painting the eastern mountains pink and gold, his official concern undermined by the lateness of his response. "Heard there was trouble out here," he announced to no one in particular. "No trouble, Sheriff," Tom Bigay said evenly. "Just an unfortunate fire, these things happen." Whitmore's cold eyes swept over the gathered neighbors, taking in the soot-stained faces, the water-soaked clothes, the obvious signs of a community that had rallied together. "Funny how these fires keep happening to folks who won't cooperate with progress. What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus Begay stepped forward, his young face set in hard lines. "Nothing at all," Whitmore said with false innocence. "Just observing that accidents seem to follow stubborn people." Daniel moved to stand beside Tom, his presence adding weight to the family's solidarity. "Sheriff, unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you move along. We have cleanup work to do." After Whitmore left, the real discussion began. Everyone understood that this fire was no accident. Just as everyone understood that it was only the beginning, Thornfield was escalating his pressure, using fear and destruction to drive out anyone who stood in his way. "He's trying to isolate us," Sam Yazzie observed. "Pick us off one by one until there's nobody left to stand together." "Then we don't let him isolate us," Emma said, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "We make it clear that an attack on one is an attack on all." The men looked at her with new respect, seeing the transformation that danger and purpose had wrought in the proper Boston lady. Emma felt their acceptance like warmth in her chest, the final piece of belonging she'd been seeking. "What do you have in mind?" Daniel asked. Emma thought about Clayton's psychology, his need to dominate and control, his fury at being publicly humiliated. "Clayton's not just trying to acquire land, he's trying to punish me for leaving him. He wants me to see everything I care about destroyed before he drags me back. So," Tom prompted, "so we use that against him," Emma continued. "We make him come to us on ground of our choosing, with witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated." Daniel studied his wife's face, seeing a strategic mind that had been hidden beneath layers of Eastern refinement. "What kind of witnesses?" Emma smiled, and for the first time, It was a smile with teeth, federal ones. Clayton's been careful to work through local authorities he controls, but federal marshals answer to Washington, not to cattle barons. And how do we get federal attention? Marcus asked. We give them crimes they can't ignore, Emma said simply. Mail tampering, intimidation of federal employees, assault on government property. Tom Bigay chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Daughter, you have a devious mind, I approve. As the group began planning their counterattack, Emma realized that something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with Daniel. The careful distance they'd maintained, the polite formality of their arranged marriage, had burned away in the barn fire along with everything else. When Daniel had thought she might die in those flames, when she'd seen the naked fear in his eyes, the truth had become unavoidable. This was no longer a marriage of convenience, no longer a strategic alliance between strangers. Somewhere between midnight ceremonies and morning coffee, between Maria's lessons and barn fires, they had fallen in love. That night, as they sat on Daniel's porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, Emma finally found the courage to voice what had been growing in her heart. Daniel, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, his face shadowed but attentive. What is it? When I married you, it was for protection. For survival, I was grateful, but I didn't love you. Emma's voice was steady but soft. I need you to know that's changed. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Emma felt fear creep up her spine. Perhaps she'd misread the situation. Perhaps his feelings remained practical, while hers had become dangerously real. Emma, Daniel said finally, when I saw you run into that burning barn, when I thought I might lose you, I realized something too. What? I realized that somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman I married for convenience and became the woman I can't imagine living without. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness but from relief, from joy, from the overwhelming rightness of finally speaking truth aloud. So what happens now? Daniel reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Now we stop pretending this is just an arrangement. Now we fight for our life together, not just our survival. As if summoned by their declaration, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley, but this time Emma felt no fear. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as partners, as lovers, as two people who had found in each other something worth defending with their lives. The riders approaching through the darkness weren't Thornfield's men, as Emma had expected, but rather Federal Marshal William Crawford and two deputies, their badges glinting in the moonlight as they dismounted near Daniel's porch. Crawford was a lean man in his 50s, with intelligent eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd spent years tracking criminals across difficult terrain. Mr. Tsozi, Mrs. Tsozi, Crawford tipped his hat respectfully. I'm Marshal Crawford. I understand you folks have been having some troubles with intimidation and property destruction. Emma felt a surge of hope mixed with surprise. Marshal, we didn't expect federal involvement so quickly. Crawford's smile was grim. Ma'am, when multiple reports reach us about mail tampering, threats against federal employees, and organized intimidation campaigns, we tend to take notice. Your neighbor Miguel Santos filed a formal complaint yesterday. Daniel invited the lawmen inside, where they spread maps and documents across the kitchen table. Crawford had been building a case against Clayton Thornfield for months, collecting testimony from displaced ranchers, documenting a pattern of illegal land acquisition through force and fraud. The problem is evidence, Crawford explained. Thornfield's careful to keep his hands clean, uses intermediaries, pays people to forget what they've seen, but if we could catch him or his men in the act of committing federal crimes— What kind of crimes? Emma asked. Arson on property that serves federal mail routes? Assault on postal employees? Interfering with territorial commerce? Crawford ticked off the offenses on his fingers. Any of those would give us jurisdiction to move against him. Emma exchanged glances with Daniel, understanding that this was the opportunity they'd been hoping for. Marshal, what if we could arrange for Thornfield to commit those crimes in front of witnesses you couldn't ignore? Crawford leaned back in his chair, studying Emma with new interest. "Mrs. Tsosi, are you suggesting we set a trap?" "I'm suggesting we give Clayton exactly what he wants. A chance to confront me directly, to try to force me back to Boston through violence and intimidation." Emma's voice grew stronger as the plan formed in her mind. "But we do it on our terms, with federal witnesses present." Daniel frowned. "Emma, that puts you directly in danger." "I'm already in danger," Emma replied. "Clayton won't stop until he either gets me back or destroys everyone I care about. At least this way we control the circumstances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story." Crawford nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" Emma outlined her strategy, using herself as bait to draw Thornfield into a confrontation that would expose his criminal methods. The plan was risky but elegant, relying on Clayton's psychology and his need to personally dominate those who defied him. "It could work," Crawford admitted. "But the timing has to be perfect, and Mrs. Tsosi, you understand that once this starts, there's no backing down. Thornfield will be fighting for his freedom as much as his pride." "I understand," Emma said firmly. "Marshal, Clayton Thornfield has been terrorizing this community for years, destroying families, driving good people from their homes. It stops now." The next morning, Emma rode into Flagstaff alone, wearing her finest remaining dress and carrying herself with the aristocratic bearing that had once been second nature. She made no attempt to hide her presence, visiting the post office, the general store, the hotel where she knew Thornfield's men kept rooms. Jake Morrison spotted her within an hour, his scarred face twisting with satisfaction as he realized their quarry had finally emerged from her sanctuary. Emma saw him following her and led him on a careful dance through the town, allowing herself to be tracked while remaining in public view. That evening, she took a room at the Frontier Hotel, making sure the desk clerk understood that she was Mrs. Emma Tsosi, visiting town on ranch business. The clerk, who received regular payments for information from Thornfield's organization, sent word immediately. Clayton Thornfield arrived the next morning with 6 armed men, his pale blue eyes blazing with the fury of a man whose will had been thwarted for months. He'd aged in the time since Emma's flight, his handsome face now marked by lines of anger and obsession that spoke of sleepless nights and consuming hatred. Emma watched from her hotel window as Clayton deployed his men around the building, cutting off escape routes with military precision. She felt fear spike through her veins, but pushed it down, focusing on the plan, on the federal marshals hidden in strategic positions throughout the town. The confrontation came at noon, when Clayton strode into the hotel lobby with Morrison and 2 other gunmen, ignoring the nervous protests of the desk clerk. Emma descended the stairs slowly, her spine straight, her face composed despite the terror hammering in her chest. "Hello, Clayton," she said evenly. "You're looking well." Clayton's smile was cold as winter wind. "Emma, my dear, you've led us quite a chase. I hope you've enjoyed your little adventure because it's over now." "I'm afraid I don't understand," Emma replied. Playing her part, "I'm Mrs. Daniel Tsosi now. I'm here on legitimate business." Clayton's laugh was harsh. "Mrs. Tsosi, you mean the sham marriage to that half-breed savage? That little charade ends today." Emma felt anger flare at the slur against Daniel, but she kept her voice level. "My marriage is legal and binding." "Clayton, you have no claim on me." "I have every claim," Clayton snarled. Stepping closer, "You humiliated me, cost me standing in Boston society, made me look like a fool. You belong to me, Emma, and I always collect what's mine." Emma backed toward the hotel's rear exit, drawing Clayton and his men away from innocent bystanders. "And if I refuse to come with you?" Clayton's smile turned predatory. "Then your Indian husband and his friends will suffer the consequences. Starting with that fire at the Bigay Ranch, Morrison, tell Mrs. Tsosi about our plans for her new family." Morrison stepped forward, his scarred face showing savage pleasure. "We're going to burn out every ranch that helped hide you. starting with your husband's place. Maybe we'll make sure he's inside when it goes up." Emma felt sick at the casual discussion of murder, but she pressed on, needing to get the threats on record. "You're talking about killing innocent people." "I'm talking about removing obstacles," Clayton corrected. "You see, my dear, I've learned that gentle persuasion doesn't work with you. So we'll try a more direct approach." He gestured to his men. "Burn the hotel. Make it look like an accident. Anyone who gets in our way doesn't survive to tell tales." Emma felt genuine terror as Morrison produced a bottle of kerosene and began splashing it on the wooden walls. Clayton was beyond reason now, willing to commit murder in broad daylight to achieve his goals. The federal marshals needed to move soon, or innocent people would die. "Clayton, please," Emma said, abandoning her act for genuine desperation. "These people have done nothing to you. If you want me, take me, but leave them alone." "Oh, I intend to take you," Clayton said, grabbing Emma's arm with bruising force. "But first, you're going to watch your new life burn. You need to understand the cost of defying me." That's when Marshal Crawford stepped out of the hotel's back room, his gun drawn and pointed steadily at Clayton's chest. "Federal Marshal, you're all under arrest for conspiracy, arson and kidnapping." Clayton's face went white with shock and rage. "You can't prove anything, Marshal. This is a private domestic dispute. Actually, we can prove quite a lot," Crawford replied calmly. "We've been recording this conversation, and we have witness testimony going back months." Morrison reached for his gun, but froze as two more federal deputies emerged from concealment. Weapons trained on Thornfield's men, the trap had worked perfectly, drawing the criminals into committing federal offenses in front of unimpeachable witnesses. "You planned this," Clayton hissed at Emma, understanding finally dawning. "You used yourself as bait." "I learned from the best," Emma replied, thinking of all the strategic manipulation she'd witnessed in Boston society. "The difference is I'm fighting for something worth protecting." Clayton's composure finally cracked completely. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll buy my way out of this, Emma. I'll hire the best lawyers, bribe the right officials, and when I'm free, I'll come for you and that savage you married." Marshal Crawford stepped forward, his expression hard. "Mr. Thornfield, you're wanted in connection with 17 cases of arson, fraud and intimidation across 3 territories. Even your money won't buy your way out of federal prison." As the marshals led Clayton and his men away in shackles, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for months. The nightmare was finally over. Clayton would face justice, and she was free to build the life she'd chosen. But freedom came with a price. As reaction set in, Emma began shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation, now leaving her weak and nauseous. She sank into a hotel chair, overwhelmed by what she'd just endured. Daniel burst through the hotel doors, having waited in agony outside while his wife faced mortal danger. He crossed the lobby in 3 strides and pulled Emma into his arms, holding her as if he could absorb her fear and trauma through sheer force of will. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "It's finally over." Emma clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Daniel, when he threatened you, when Morrison talked about burning you alive, I thought I might lose you before I'd had the chance to really love you." "You're not going to lose me," Daniel said fiercely. "Not to Thornfield, not to anyone. We fought too hard for this life to let anyone take it away." Marshal Crawford approached them, his official demeanor softened by respect. "Mrs. Tizzosi, what you did today took remarkable courage. Your testimony will put Thornfield away for 20 years minimum." Emma nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. "Marshal, what about his other victims? The families he's driven out, the ranches he's stolen through intimidation?" "Federal prosecutors will be investigating all of it," Crawford assured her. "Thornfield's criminal enterprise is finished. The people he victimized will have a chance to rebuild." As they prepared to leave Flagstaff, Emma took one last look at the hotel where her old life had finally died. Clayton Thornfield's hold over her was broken forever, not through running or hiding, But through facing her fears and fighting back with everything she had, the ride back to the ranch was quiet. Both Emma and Daniel lost in their own thoughts about what they'd endured and what lay ahead. The desert landscape that had once seemed alien and threatening now felt like home. A harsh but honest place where she'd learned who she really was beneath the layers of Boston propriety. "Daniel," Emma said as they crested the hill overlooking their valley, "I need you to know something." "What's that?" "So when I married you, I was Emma Reed. A woman running away from a life that was killing her slowly." Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. "But today, facing Clayton, I wasn't running anymore. I was Emma Tsosi, fighting for the life and the man I love." Daniel reined in his horse and turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "Emma, are you saying—" "I'm saying that I choose this life. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I choose you not as a refuge, but as my partner. I choose this hard, beautiful place as my home." Daniel dismounted and helped Emma down from her horse, then took her hands in his calloused ones. "Emma Tsosi, will you marry me again? Not out of desperation this time, but out of love." Emma felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Yes, Daniel Tsosi, I will marry you again, and as many times as it takes to convince you that I'm never leaving." They kissed there on the hilltop overlooking their valley, two people who'd found in each other not just love, but the courage to become who they were meant to be. Below them, the ranch spread out in the golden afternoon light, a testament to what could be built when two determined people decided to face the world together. 6 months after Clayton Thornfield's arrest, the Arizona Territory hummed with the energy of renewal and justice. Federal prosecutors had dismantled his criminal empire piece by piece, returning stolen lands to their rightful owners and compensating families who'd been driven from their homes. The territorial newspapers had dubbed it the Great Reckoning, and Emma found herself something she'd never expected to be, a hero in the public eye. The Flagstaff Daily Sun had run a front-page story titled "Boston Lady Brings Down Cattle Baron," complete with a sketch of Emma facing down Clayton in the hotel lobby. The article painted her as a symbol of frontier courage, a refined Eastern woman who'd adapted to Western life and fought corruption with intelligence and bravery. Emma found the attention both flattering and embarrassing as she stood in the kitchen of her ranch house, now expanded with 2 additional rooms and a proper dining area. She was preparing for the most important celebration of her new life, her second wedding to Daniel, this time surrounded by the entire community that had become her family. Maria Begay bustled around the kitchen with the authority of a woman orchestrating a feast, directing the preparation of traditional Navajo foods, alongside Emma's attempts at dishes she remembered from Boston society parties. The cultural fusion reflected Emma's own transformation, no longer fully Eastern or Western, but something entirely new. "Daughter, you're frowning at that bread dough like it insulted your ancestors," Maria observed with amusement. "Cooking with anger makes tough food." Emma laughed, wiping flour from her hands. "I'm not angry, Maria. I'm nervous. What if I'm terrible at being a real wife? What if Daniel realizes he married a woman who still burns coffee and can't tell a good horse from a bad one?" Maria's expression grew gentle but firm. "Emma, child, you've been a real wife for months now. You've stood beside your husband through fire and fear. You've protected his friends, defended his land, fought his enemies. What more could any man ask? But I still don't know everything about ranch life, about Navajo customs, about being the kind of woman this place needs." "Listen to me," Maria said, taking Emma's hands in hers. "Wisdom isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn through living. Through making mistakes and learning from them, you've earned your place here, not through perfection, but through courage." Outside, the sound of arriving guests filled the air with laughter and conversation. Don Begay's voice boomed over the others as he directed the placement of tables and benches in the ranch yard. The entire community had turned out for this celebration, recognizing it as something more than a wedding. It was a declaration that love could triumph over hatred, that good people standing together could defeat corruption. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, resplendent in a new shirt embroidered with traditional Navajo designs, his dark hair freshly trimmed, his eyes bright with happiness that transformed his usually serious features. "Ladies, we have guests arriving and the bride is hiding in the kitchen." Emma felt her heart skip at the sight of him. This man who'd become so much more than the stranger who'd offered her desperate marriage in a desert canyon. "Daniel, I'm not hiding, I'm helping with the food." "You're worrying," Daniel said with gentle accuracy. "Emma, everyone here loves you. They've seen who you really are, seen what you're capable of. There's nothing to worry about." Maria shooed them both out of the kitchen. "Go greet your guests, both of you. The food will be ready when it's ready, and not a moment before." The ranch yard had been transformed into an outdoor cathedral. Strings of paper flowers hung between the cottonwood trees. Tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, and a small platform had been erected where Reverend Samuel Hayes from Flagstaff would perform the Christian ceremony. While Tom Begay would conduct the traditional Navajo blessing, Emma was amazed at the diversity of guests who'd come to celebrate their union. White ranchers stood beside Navajo families, former neighbors of Miguel Santos, mixed with federal marshals and territorial officials. Even some of the townspeople who'd initially rejected Emma now approached her with shy smiles and congratulations. Sheriff Augustus Whitmore had been notably absent from any recent gatherings, having been quietly removed from office when his connections to Thornfield's operation became public knowledge. His replacement, Sheriff James Mitchell, was a fair-minded man who'd already earned respect from both white and native communities. As Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and admiring the gifts people had brought, she marveled at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been Emma Reed, trapped in a gilded cage in Boston. Now she was Emma Tsosi, a rancher's wife who could shoot straight, deliver a foal, and face down federal criminals without flinching. Miguel Santos approached with his wife Carmen and their 3 children, his face beaming with the joy of a man who'd reclaimed his stolen land. "Mrs. Tsosi, Carmen and I wanted to thank you again. Without your courage, we would have lost everything." Carmen stepped forward with a beautifully woven blanket. "This is made from wool of our own sheep, dyed with plants from our land. It's a small gift for the woman who helped us keep our home." Emma accepted the blanket with tears in her eyes, understanding that it represented much more than woolen dye. It represented the preservation of a family's dreams, the continuation of a way of life that Thornfield would have destroyed. "Carmen, Miguel, this is beautiful, thank you." As the afternoon progressed, Emma found herself in conversation with Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose family had been among Thornfield's earliest victims. The Pattersons had returned to rebuild their burned ranch, using federal compensation money and loans from neighbors who believed in second chances. "Mrs. Tsosi," Eleanor said, "I wanted you to know that my daughters speak of you as a hero. They say you showed them that a woman doesn't have to accept what men try to force on her." Emma felt humbled by the comment. "Mrs. Patterson, I just did what anyone would do when cornered." "No, child. You did what a brave woman does when she decides to fight back. There's a difference." The ceremony began as the sun reached its zenith, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber. Emma wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Maria had helped her sew, adorned with traditional silver and turquoise jewelry that marked her as part of the community. Daniel stood beside her in clothes that similarly blended cultures, symbolizing their union of 2 worlds. Reverend Hayes spoke of love as a force that could overcome any obstacle, of marriage as a partnership between equals who chose to face life's challenges together. His words carried extra weight, given what Emma and Daniel had endured to reach this moment. "Daniel and Emma," the Reverend said, "you've already proven your commitment to each other through trials that would break weaker bonds. Today you're not just making vows, you're confirming choices you've already made through your actions." Tom Begay's blessing followed, conducted in Navajo, with English translation for the mixed crowd. He spoke of the four directions, of the harmony between earth and sky, of the strength that comes when two people walk the same path with mutual respect and understanding. A key. In our tradition, Tom explained, marriage is not just between two people, but between two families, two communities. Today, we welcome Emma not as a stranger who married into our family, but as a daughter who has already proven her worth. When it came time for vows, Emma and Daniel had written their own, drawing from their shared experiences and the love that had grown from desperate beginnings into something deeper than either had imagined possible. "Emma," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "when I offered you marriage in that canyon, I thought I was saving your life. I didn't know you would save mine in return. You've made me a better man, a stronger rancher, a more complete human being. Today, I promise not just to love you, but to continue growing alongside you as we build our life together." Emma's voice trembled with emotion as she responded, "Daniel, when I accepted your proposal, I was running from something that terrified me. I didn't know I was running towards something that would complete me. You've given me not just safety, but purpose, not just love, but a place to belong. Today, I promise to be your partner in all things, your equal in all struggles, your companion for all the years ahead." As they exchanged rings, Emma noticed the silver bracelet Daniel had given her that first night. Now worn smooth by months of wear, it had become part of her, a symbol of the woman she'd become rather than the woman she'd been. The celebration that followed stretched into the evening. With music and dancing and stories shared under the star-filled desert sky, Emma found herself swept into traditional Navajo dances, guided by patient teachers who laughed at her mistakes and praised her efforts. Marcus Begay, now married himself to a young woman from a neighboring ranch, raised a toast as the evening wound down. To Daniel and Emma Tsosi, who showed us that love can triumph over hatred, that courage can defeat corruption, that two people from different worlds can create something beautiful together. The crowd raised their glasses, voices joining in agreement, and Emma felt the weight of acceptance, of belonging, of being truly home for the first time in her life as the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and promises to visit soon. Emma and Daniel stood together on their porch, watching the last wagon disappear into the darkness. "Mrs. Tsosi," Daniel said softly, "how does it feel to be officially married?" Emma laughed, leaning into his strong warmth. "It feels exactly the same as being unofficially married, which is to say, it feels like home." They sat together on the porch swing Daniel had built during the winter, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the gentle lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the distant call of coyotes celebrating their own wild freedom. "Daniel," Emma said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if Sheriff Whitmore's men had found me that first night? If you hadn't offered me marriage?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think we both would have remained incomplete. You would have been caught and dragged back to Boston. I would have stayed alone on this ranch. We would have missed the chance to become who we were meant to be." Emma nodded, understanding the profound truth in his words. "Sometimes I think about writing to my father, telling him about my new life. But then I realize he wouldn't understand the woman I've become." "Maybe someday he will," Daniel said gently. "People can change, can learn to see past their prejudices. Look at our community. How many minds have been opened by watching us build our life together." As they prepared for bed, Emma looked around the house they'd built together, at the furniture they'd chosen, the photographs they'd accumulated, the small details that made a house into a home. Every item told a story of their journey, from strangers to lovers to partners in every sense of the word. In their bedroom, now truly shared, Emma found a package on her pillow, wrapped in brown paper and tied with ribbon. "What's this?" she asked. "A wedding gift," Daniel said with unusual shyness. "Something I've been working on." Emma unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her initials. E.T., Emma Tsosie, the pages inside were blank, waiting for her to fill them with the story of their life together. "I thought you might want to record our adventures," Daniel explained. "For our children or their children, so they'll know how we found each other." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes at the mention of children, a future they'd begun to discuss as their love deepened. "Daniel, it's perfect. I'll start tonight." With the story of a desperate proposal in a desert canyon. As Emma prepared to write the first entry in her new journal, she realized that this was both an ending and a beginning. The story of Emma Reed, trapped and frightened, was complete. The story of Emma Tsosie, rancher's wife and frontier woman, was just beginning, outside their window. The lighthouse beam of Beacon Point swept across the darkness, a steady reminder that some lights never went out, that some promises were kept forever, that some love stories were strong enough to withstand any storm. Emma opened her journal and began to write. "My name is Emma Tsosie, and this is the story of how I found my way home through darkness, through fear, through the kindness of a stranger who became the love of my life. It begins with 3 words that changed everything. Marry me tonight." The desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of morning. And in the ranch house that love had built, 2 people who'd found their way to each other against all odds settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that they'd created something lasting, something worth fighting for, something that would endure long after their own story had passed into legend. 5 years later, Arizona territory, 1890. The morning sun painted the Tsosie Ranch in shades of gold and amber as Emma stood on the expanded front porch, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly. At 29, she had grown into her role as a rancher's wife, with a grace that surprised even herself. Her once soft hands now capable and strong, her pale Boston complexion bronzed by years under the desert sun. Behind her, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the house as little Mary Tsosie, age 3, chased her younger brother Thomas through the kitchen while their father attempted to cook breakfast. The chaos was musical to Emma's ears, a symphony of family life that she'd never imagined possible during those desperate early days. Daniel emerged from the house carrying Thomas, now 2 years old, his dark hair a perfect blend of his parents' features, his curious eyes already showing the intelligence that would serve him well in the changing world of the new century. "Emma, you should be resting," Daniel said with the gentle authority of a husband who'd learned to worry about his wife's tendency to overwork. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," Emma replied, with the amused exasperation of a woman who'd had this conversation before. "Besides, someone needs to supervise the preparations for today's celebration." The celebration in question was the 5th anniversary of their second wedding. But more importantly, it marked the completion of the Tsosie Community School, the first institution in the territory designed to serve both white and Native American children with equal respect and opportunity. Emma had spent 2 years raising funds, navigating territorial politics, and designing a curriculum that honored both cultures. The school represented everything Emma and Daniel had fought for. A place where their children could learn alongside friends from different backgrounds, where knowledge was shared freely, where the artificial barriers that had once divided communities were replaced with understanding and cooperation. The 2-story building rose from the desert floor like a testament to human possibility, its red brick walls and white trim gleaming in the morning light. Maria Begay, now showing her age but still formidable in her wisdom, arrived early to help with the final preparations, her arms full of traditional foods that would complement Emma's attempts at creating a feast worthy of the occasion. "Daughter, you're glowing like sunrise," she observed. "This baby will be strong like his parents." "Or her parents," Emma corrected with a smile. "Daniel insists it's a girl this time." "Fathers always think they know," Maria chuckled, settling her baskets on the kitchen table. "But babies choose their own paths, just like their parents did. Speaking of paths, have you decided what you'll name this little one?" Emma's hand moved in slow circles over her belly. If it's a boy, we're thinking of Samuel. After Daniel's grandfather, if it's a girl, perhaps Anna, to honor the woman who came before me in this house. Maria's eyes softened at the mention of Daniel's first wife. Anna would be honored to have a child carry her name, especially a child born to the woman who brought happiness back to her family. As the morning progressed, guests began arriving from across the territory. Federal Marshal Crawford, now retired but still carrying himself with military bearing, brought his wife, Margaret, and twin daughters Alice and Rebecca, who immediately joined the Tsosi children in their elaborate games of cowboys and Indians that bore no resemblance to the harsh realities their parents had faced. Crawford had changed significantly since his law enforcement days, his stern demeanor softened by retirement and the joy of watching his daughters grow up in a more peaceful territory. "Emma," he said, approaching with genuine warmth, "Margaret and I wanted to thank you again for helping Alice with her reading last winter. She's made remarkable progress." "Alice is a bright child," Emma replied. "She just needed someone to believe in her potential. Children bloom when they feel valued." Miguel and Carmen Santos arrived with their expanded family, now including 5 children ranging from teenagers to toddlers. Miguel had prospered since reclaiming his land, expanding his operation and becoming a voice for other small ranches in territorial politics. Carmen had become Emma's closest friend, a woman who understood the challenges of building a life in unforgiving country. "Emma, you look radiant," Carmen said, embracing her friend carefully. "When is the baby due?" "October, just after harvest," Emma replied. "Daniel's convinced we'll have a daughter who'll be as stubborn as her mother." "All children are stubborn," Carmen laughed. "It's how they survive long enough to become wise. My oldest, Elena, wants to attend the new school. She's already planning to become a teacher like you." Emma felt a surge of pride at the mention of Elena Santos, a bright 15-year-old who'd shown remarkable aptitude for learning despite limited educational opportunities. "Elena would make an excellent teacher, Carmen. Have you considered sending her to the Territorial College in Tucson?" "The cost," Carmen said hesitantly. "We're doing well, but college money—" "Let me talk to Daniel," Emma interrupted gently. "The school needs scholarships for promising students. Elena could be our first recipient." The most surprising guest was Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, now remarried to a kind widower named Robert Sterling, and serving as the territory's first female school inspector. She'd become an unlikely ally in Emma's educational efforts, using her official position to ensure that progressive policies were implemented fairly across all communities. "Mrs. Tsosi," Eleanor said formally, then broke into a warm smile. "Emma, the school is magnificent. I've never seen such thoughtful integration of different teaching methods. The Territorial Education Board is already asking for your curriculum to be adapted for other districts." Emma felt pride swell in her chest as she looked toward the completed schoolhouse, built of local stone and timber, with large windows that flooded the interior with natural light. The building itself was a symbol of cooperation, constructed by volunteers from both white and native communities, funded through a combination of federal grants, private donations, and Emma's own tireless fundraising efforts. The interior was equally impressive, with separate classrooms for different age groups, a small library already stocked with books donated from across the territory, and a large common room where community meetings could be held. Emma had insisted on maps of the world, scientific instruments and art supplies, believing that children in the Arizona Territory deserved the same educational opportunities as those in Boston or New York. Tom Begay stood near the school's entrance, his aged hands tracing the carved sign that read, "Tsosi Community School, founded 1890, where all children learn together." His granddaughter, Lucy Begay, now 16, would be the school's first Native American teacher. Having completed her education at the Territorial College with Emma's mentorship and financial support. "Tom looks proud enough to burst," Daniel observed. joining Emma on the porch with their son Thomas balanced on his hip, Mary clinging to his free hand with the determined grip of a 3-year-old who'd learned that interesting things happened when adults gathered. "He should be proud," Emma replied. "This school exists because people like Tom were willing to trust a crazy idea from a former Boston debutante. He risked his standing in the community to support something that had never been tried before." Daniel's expression grew serious for a moment. "Emma, do you ever miss it? The life you left behind, the comfort, the certainty of knowing exactly what was expected of you?" Emma considered the question while watching their daughter Mary attempt to teach a group of children how to properly curtsy, a skill that seemed absurdly formal in the desert setting, but which Mary insisted was important for being a lady. "Daniel, I miss some things about Boston. The libraries full of books I haven't read, the symphony concerts, the intellectual conversations at dinner parties where ideas mattered more than cattle prices." She turned to face her husband, this man who'd given her not just love, but the freedom to become herself. "But I don't miss being Emma Reed, that woman who lived her entire life according to other people's expectations, who never made a single important decision for herself. Emma Tsosi chose her own path, built her own life, fought her own battles. I wouldn't trade that woman for all the comfort in Boston." The formal dedication ceremony began at noon, with Territorial Governor Nathan Murphy himself present to cut the ribbon and deliver remarks about the importance of education in building Arizona's future. Murphy was a progressive politician who'd supported statehood efforts and educational reform, his presence lending official weight to Emma's vision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Governor Murphy announced to the gathered crowd, "this school represents the best of what our territory can become. A place where all children, regardless of their heritage, can receive the education they need to build a better future for Arizona." Emma had been invited to speak, but she'd declined, preferring to let the school's success speak for itself. Instead, she stood with Daniel and their children, watching as the ribbon was cut and the doors officially opened to reveal the bright, welcoming interior. Reverend Hayes offered a blessing that acknowledged multiple spiritual traditions, speaking of education as a sacred trust and teachers as guardians of human potential, while Tom Begay performed a traditional ceremony calling on the 4 directions to protect the children who would learn within these walls. The fusion of customs felt natural now, a reflection of how much the community had evolved. As children from across the territory explored their new classrooms, Emma noticed how easily they mixed. White children and native children comparing slates and sharing books, their natural curiosity overcoming the prejudices their parents had once held. Lucy Begay moved among them with the confidence of a natural teacher, already planning lessons that would honor every child's heritage while preparing them for the modern world. "Mrs. Tsosi," a voice called, and Emma turned to see Judge Harrison Wells, the territorial official who'd presided over Clayton Thornfield's trial, approaching with a serious expression that immediately put her on alert. "Might I have a word in private?" Emma felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, wondering if some new crisis threatened their hard-won peace. "Of course, Judge Wells. Daniel, could you watch the children for a moment?" Wells led her a short distance from the crowd, his demeanor suggesting news of significance. "I wanted to inform you personally that Clayton Thornfield died in federal prison last month," Wells said quietly. "Consumption, the doctor said. He'd been ill for some time." Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that the threat was permanently ended, sadness for a life wasted on hatred and obsession, gratitude that she'd lived to see justice served and her own story reach its peaceful conclusion. "Thank you for telling me, Judge. I'm glad it's finally over." "There's more," Wells continued. "Thornfield's will left his remaining assets to establish a fund for victims of his crimes. It seems he experienced some form of redemption in his final months. The prison chaplain said he spent considerable time writing letters of apology to those he'd wronged." Emma stared at the judge in amazement. Clayton left money to help his victims. The fund, will provide scholarships for children whose families were harmed by his actions, medical care for those who suffered injuries, and support for widows left destitute by his schemes, Wells explained. The chaplain said Thornfield spoke often of you in his final weeks, expressing regret for the pain he'd caused and admiration for the life you'd built, despite his efforts to destroy it. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange mercy of closure. Judge, I never expected forgiveness from Clayton, but I'm glad he found peace before the end. As Wells walked away, Emma found herself contemplating the strange turns that life could take. Clayton Thornfield, the man who'd once threatened to destroy everything she loved, had ended his days trying to make amends for his cruelty. It didn't excuse his actions, but it offered a kind of closure she hadn't expected, a final chapter that spoke to the possibility of redemption even in the hardest hearts. Daniel appeared beside her, having sensed her need for support through the mysterious connection that had developed between them over 5 years of marriage. "Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," Emma told him about Thornfield's death and final gesture, watching as Daniel processed the information with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "I suppose even the worst people can find redemption if they're willing to face the truth about themselves," he said finally. "It doesn't change what he did, but maybe it means something that he understood the damage before he died." The celebration continued into the evening, with families sharing meals at long tables set up in the schoolyard under strings of paper lanterns that cast dancing shadows on the ground. Traditional Navajo songs mixed with popular ballads, while children played games that required no translation, their laughter creating a soundtrack of pure joy. Marshall Crawford approached Emma as she sat watching the festivities, her children finally asleep in Daniel's arms after a day of excitement. "Mrs. Tsosi, I wanted you to know that your story has inspired similar efforts across the West. Communities from Colorado to California are following your model, building schools that serve everyone regardless of background." Emma felt a deep satisfaction at this news. "Marshall, when I first came to Arizona, I was just trying to survive. I never imagined that our struggles might help others build better communities." "That's often how the best changes happen," Crawford replied. "One person decides to stand up for what's right, others see the courage and follow. Before you know it, the whole world has shifted. Your school will be remembered long after we're all gone." As the evening wound down and guests began their journeys home, Emma found herself alone with Daniel on the school's front steps, looking out over the community they'd helped build. The building stood as a monument to what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, love over fear. "Daniel," Emma said softly, "do you think our children will understand what we went through to build this life? Will they appreciate the sacrifices, the risks we took?" Daniel considered the question while watching Mary and Thomas sleep peacefully, despite the ongoing celebration around them. "I think they'll understand that love requires courage, that building something worthwhile means facing opposition, that the best life is one you choose for yourself rather than accept from others. They'll have their own challenges, their own choices to make." Emma nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Their children would grow up in a world their parents had helped create, a place where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where opportunity was available to all who worked for it, where love could triumph over hatred through persistence and courage. "I've been thinking about expanding the school," Emma said, her hand unconsciously moving to her growing belly, "adding a library wing, maybe bringing in teachers for music and art, creating something that serves not just children, but the entire community as a center for learning and culture." Daniel smiled, recognizing the passionate determination that had driven Emma from the beginning. "Of course you have. Emma Tsosi doesn't build small dreams. What would you need? More fundraising, more political support. Probably another year of planning," Emma said, her mind already working through the logistics. "But imagine it, Daniel. A place where adults could come for evening classes, where we could host lectures and concerts, where the whole community could grow together. Then we'll make it happen," Daniel said simply. We've accomplished stranger things than expanding a school." As they prepared to carry their sleeping children home, Emma took one last look at the school, imagining the generations of students who would learn within its walls, the friendships that would cross cultural boundaries, the leaders who would emerge with the skills and understanding needed to build an even better world. The building stood as proof that dreams, no matter how ambitious, could become reality with enough determination and community support. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of rain as the Tsosi family made their way back to the ranch house. Emma walking slowly to accommodate her pregnancy, Daniel managing both children with practiced ease. Behind them, the school stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, a beacon of hope for the future. In her bedroom that night, Emma opened the leather journal Daniel had given her 5 years earlier, now filled with the daily chronicles of their life together. Tonight's entry would record the school's dedication, Thornfield's death, and the continuing miracle of building a life based on love rather than fear. "Today we planted seeds that will grow for generations," she wrote, "not just in the minds of children who will learn in our school, but in the hearts of adults who have seen that difference can be strength, that courage can overcome hatred, that love between two people can transform an entire community. Clayton Thornfield is dead, but the good that came from opposing his evil will live on in every child who learns to read in our classrooms, every friendship that crosses old boundaries, every dream that becomes reality because someone dared to believe in possibility." She paused, her hand resting on her belly where their third child grew, already loved, already part of the continuing story. "To our children and their children and all who come after, may you remember that the best life is one you choose, with courage, build with love, and defend with unwavering commitment to what is right. May you never forget that sometimes the most desperate proposals lead to the greatest love stories." Outside their window, the ranch settled into peaceful sleep, cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses moving quietly in their corrals, the gentle sounds of a life built on solid foundations. And in the master bedroom of the house that love had built, Daniel and Emma Tsosi lay sleeping, their bodies curved together with the easy intimacy of partners who had chosen each other again and again, through every test life could devise. The desert that had once seemed so alien and threatening now embraced them like family. A harsh but honest land that had taught them everything they needed to know about endurance, about the strength that comes from facing adversity together, about the beauty that emerges when two people decide to build something lasting in an uncertain world. And in the morning, they would wake to another day of challenges and opportunities. Another chance to choose love over fear, another opportunity to plant seeds that would bloom long after their own story had passed into the legends that grandchildren tell by firelight. Their voices carrying forward the truth that some love stories are strong enough to change the world, one desperate proposal at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.